And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Nuestro Ñānamoli, who, as a consequence of diving into a lake and breaking his neck, met 6 luminous beings on the other side that bestowed on him a unique mission. Nuestro, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Jeff, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited and honored to have this opportunity to share a story with your audience.
Well, you have an amazing story, and I'm excited to bring it to my audience. So, if you don't mind, let's start on the day you had your accident and go from there.
Okay, well, it was a warm summer day. I was floating on my back in a small lake in Saluda, North Carolina, and I was experiencing a really nice moment of gratitude, which was quite a switch because 3 months prior, my fiance at the time had unexpectedly broken up with me. So for about 3 months, I was going through some pretty intense heartache. And I had swam out to the middle of the lake to get away from these thoughts. I wanted to send her emails, win her back with a letter. But I found that by being in the water and submerging my ears below the water and just allowing my body to be still, and just looking at the blue sky, just acknowledging the trees around the perimeter of the lake, it allowed me to find this state of stillness. And when I arrived there, it was so nice that I then started feeling this huge wellspring of gratitude. And after a time, I realized, okay, well, I'm here at this lake, not alone. I'm here with friends. We're here for a gathering. I should probably be more social and go join everybody else. So I rolled over onto my front and I started swimming back toward this old rickety dock. And on the dock, on the end of the dock, was this tall blue water slide, like something out of a 1970s movie, like a summer camp movie. And I get in line. I start climbing the aluminum steps. The boy before me goes head first. So I just assumed that's the way to go. There was a little spigot of water at the top. So it was a very slick slide. And I just stuck my arms out in front of me and I let gravity take me down the slide. I shot out at the bottom, going very fast. And then when I dove into the water, I swept my arms back so that I could go even deeper into the lake. And the feeling of going down the slide was really blissful. It was really sweet and just really enjoyable. And a second later, that was all shattered when I struck the bottom head first. And what I didn't know was that the lake was only 2 feet deep. And I hit so hard that at first I thought I had been struck by lightning. There was an intense pain that originated in the center of my neck, but it radiated out to my fingertips and to my toes. And then I found myself underneath the water, unable to breathe, shuddering and reverberating back because my head had plowed into the sand and the rocks, and it was a straight on hit. And then now I'm shaking underwater and moving backwards. And I was feeling all of these emotions, all of this pain. I was embarrassed that I'd ruined the gathering for everybody. I'm injured. They don't even know. As soon as I come out of the water, we're all going to have to leave. And then a voice within me, which wasn't my voice, said, "Slow down." And I listened to that. And then I realized, okay, I have to stand up. I need to breathe. So I found my footing in the sand. I stood up. And then the next thing I am aware of is that the world feels like it's been cracked open. It feels sideways, and I'm unable to stand up straight. And all around me, I'm seeing stars. But these stars were the size of basketballs, and they looked like luminous spheres, and they felt as though they each had personality, and it felt as though they had each turned toward me. And the understanding that I suddenly had was, when we hit our head, we see stars. When we hit our head very hard, these stars get really big. And in fact, they are energies or guides or spirits or something that turns toward us to see if we need help. And if it's time to go, maybe they expand to their full form and take you with them. But that was the first inkling I had that something strange was going on in addition to this horrible pain, and some opening was beginning to happen. But of course, I had hit my head, so I wasn't focused on that. Everything was just wild in my mind of trying to figure out what was happening and what I needed to do next. I was saying to anybody on the beach who would listen, I need to go to the hospital. I need to go now. I could barely speak because my neck was hurting so much. And I could feel people around me. I could see hands. I could feel hands moving me over to a bench. They helped to lay me down. And I told them I needed to lay down because I was going into shock. And I knew this because of my military training. I used to be an Army Ranger. So they lay me down. And once again, this voice from within says, "You need to go now." And it was a very commanding voice, and I heeded it. And so I said to my friends, "I need to go now." And I didn't feel there was any time to wait for them to lift me up. I had to use my own strength to stand up and go get in a car and go to the hospital. So I used my hand to push myself up. At least that's what I thought I was doing. And that's when I learned that the right side of my body was paralyzed. And so when I thought I was pushing myself up, I actually just shifted my weight off of the bench and fell face first into the gravel and bent my neck again. And at that moment, my friend saw, okay, there's something really wrong. And then I could feel hands lifting me again. I could feel people carrying me toward a car. The seat was reclined. I was put in. I asked for a neck brace or something like that, but there wasn't one at the lake and there wasn't time to wait for an ambulance. Um, so we drove 40 minutes to the hospital. And as soon as I arrived, I was put on a stretcher. I was given a C-spine neck brace, and I was taken into the MRI, taken into x-rays. And then a man with a mask came over, a surgeon, I would soon learn. And he was wearing a mask. It was COVID, so everybody was wearing a mask. But he pulled his mask down and he said, "You're the luckiest guy in the hospital. I just took a look at your scans and you've fully shattered your neck. Your neck is broken. And had the car stopped abruptly on the drive here, there's nothing holding your head. And that would have been the end of you." And he said, "We have to do an emergency surgery because as you've been moving and driving and as you fell off the bench, the bones in your neck have been migrating, the shattered fragments, and they're all very close to your nerves and they could slice through and paralyze you fully." Um, but he said, "It's such a complicated surgery. We need a team and the team is not assembled. So we're going to do it tomorrow." And then he said, "Would you like morphine for your pain?" And at this point, I was intentionally resisting all medicine. And the reason for this was because the whole time from the moment I broke my neck to the moment I arrived at the hospital and started speaking with the surgeon, I was employing meditation, practicing meditation. And this is something I had been doing at that point for 7 years. After the military, I eventually found my way to meditation centers. I fully committed myself, just like I fully committed to the military. I thought I've trained for war. I found war. I'd now like to train for peace. And I began to find peace. So much so that I devoted myself to becoming a Buddhist scholar, studying all of the suttas, studying the Visuddhimagga, studying the Dhammapada, any Buddhist texts I could get my hand on, but then also the Course in Miracles, Edgar Cayce, Dolores Cannon, anything that spoke of spirituality, I was into. And at a certain point, I was ready to become a Buddhist monk. So I even started visiting monasteries. Of course, that didn't quite go that direction. I became engaged. So then when I wound up in the hospital and I'm feeling this intense pain, I knew from my training to try just to observe it and not have any resistance or any aversion toward it, to just become incredibly curious. Okay, my body's on fire, my neck is on fire. What is it? What is this feeling? And rather than looking away and wanting it to be over, I just looked directly at it and I faced it. And to describe the feeling and the transformation of it is not possible, but maybe a good way to explain it is when you're being chased in a dream by a monster and you turn and face it. And suddenly it's not scary. So I was feeling this intense energy, but when I turned and faced it, it was just energy. It was changing every millisecond. It was fire all over my body, but I was able to just be with it. And it was as though I was kind of riding a wave of pain. Like I was surfing the wave. If I were to fall off and lose my awareness, I would get pummeled in the waves, but I was staying just abreast of the changing, and that was able to transmute the pain. So I resisted morphine. I'm laying there on the stretcher. The mask that they put on me doesn't fit because I'm wearing a neck brace, so it keeps slipping up over my eyes. And my lifelong wish of just being in a meditation cave, meditating for months on end, kind of came true because I was locked in this tiny box of my own cave where I couldn't see anything. I didn't know who was around. I couldn't move at all. And all I could do was meditate. All I could do was observe my breathing and observe this crazy pain. And then at some point, the pain became too much. My body was weak. I was sweating. I couldn't do it anymore. I said, okay, I will take the morphine, please. So the nurses come in, they administer the morphine, and then the nurse left. And then a strange thing happened. She started to dim the lights, but almost dramatically slow. And I started thinking, okay, you don't have to do it that slow. My eyes, aren't, the head injury didn't hurt me that much to where my vision, everything's fine. Just turn the lights off. But then I noticed somebody else was pulling my stretcher backwards. And then I realized I don't think there's a backwards. And I felt as though I was going into a hallway backwards. And then I could see forward into the room. And then I noticed, or it occurred to me, oh my gosh, I'm dying. Now it's happening. And then I could hear the tone of my own heartbeat flatline. And then I could see the nurses running into the room. And as the nurses ran into the room, their fear, their collective fear, washed over my physical body. And that fear washing over the physical body reignited my own fear. And I got sucked right back into my body. But I was aware, okay, death was coming. And I wasn't quite ready. I'd lost my awareness because of this morphine. Or at least I thought it was because of the morphine. But that was if the orbs of light were kind of the first sign something is happening. The tunneling going backwards was the second thing that really started to open me up to, okay, I really might be on the edge of death. I really have to be as keenly aware as I can. And I also understood that my vision had become fixed on the 3D world, and I wasn't fixing it within my body, in my own breath, and my own mind. So I think part of that vision of still focusing on the world prevented me from leaving it. So the next day, the nurses come in. Now it's time for surgery. They begin preparing for me. Strangely enough, they went to shave the incision spots that they'd be making to cut into my neck, which was on the front of my neck and on the back. And the morning before I left for the lake, for some random reason, I shaved the front and the back of my neck, which I've never done. And I took a 360 video of my own neck, which I've never done. So the last video I have of myself on my phone is my own untouched neck. The next one is, neck with scars and stitches. As I'm laying there on the stretcher, this voice from the other day comes up within me, and I find myself asking the nurses, where is my body going to go? And they said, oh, well, we're going to take you to surgery. And the voice said through me, no. We need to know where he's going. Where is his body actually going? Please walk us through the transit route. So the nurses said, okay, well, we're going to wheel you down this hallway. We take you to this elevator. We go to this floor, this room. Surgery is performed there. Then we come back to this elevator, back down the hallway, and you will wake up in the same room. And I said, I will wake up in the same room. They said, yes. And I said, okay. And then I immediately began observing my breathing, just noticing the respiration coming in through my nostrils, going out through my nostrils. And I anchored myself as keenly as I could on the present moment, just my breathing. So I had no thoughts of my family and my friends and the life I may be leaving behind, and no worry about what was to come. And they had told me, you may die. They had told me, you may come out of this fully paralyzed. And I even had to sign with my unparalyzed left hand that, yes, I agree, this could be the end. And I used all of my mental strength just to be incredibly present. And I think that is what allowed what happened next to transpire. The next memory I have, the next conscious memory I have, is standing at a doorway in space, deep space. There are stars around. The doorway is maybe 15 feet tall, and there are 6 beings of light standing in the doorway facing me. It looks somewhat like they're wearing robes, there's a silhouette. The silhouette of them is bright white light, and then it radiates out into a neon blue, but not the harsh light of neon. It was a very peaceful, incredibly wise, loving, deep blue. And I couldn't see the middle of them. It was darkness, like a void. And it wasn't a scary darkness, like a hooded figure. It was just something with my perception wasn't at the level to actually observe them. I could only see what was emanating off of them, and what was emanating off of them was incredibly peaceful. And they clearly had a commanding presence, and I felt very honored to be in front of them. And we had finished some kind of tour of the cosmos, or some kind of communication download, or I'd seen something. I'd seen a lot, but there was an agreement being made, and that's why I was standing in front of them. The agreement was, you won't remember anything you've seen, or you'll never shut up about it. The second part of the agreement was, you have to do the work. Then I find myself turning away from them, but it's not quite the right way to describe it, because I had no body. My awareness was just now not focused on them. It was now focused toward the earthly realm, or the earthly plane. And I found myself once again in a long hallway, or a long tunnel, maybe. And I was going kind of down and forward, and down and forward. And I was running, but it was the funniest feeling of running, because I felt like rubber. I felt like, I mean, I've sewn it here in the tapestry, but I felt like a rainbow man with, if you remember this show, Gumby arms or rubber arms, or I felt like a pinwheel. I didn't really understand how to run. And I was just sort of flopping around, just a ball of energy racing toward my body on a stretcher. And I could see it in the distance. And I was getting closer and closer, and I could see the nurses in the room doing different things to my body. And then I merged with my body, and my physical eyes opened, but my overall perception, my vision of the room never changed. And I immediately lit up with joy, because I was able to lift my arms and my legs, and I was lifting my hands and my feet. And they were telling me, don't move, don't move. And I was just so excited. Oh, I'm not paralyzed. I can move. I couldn't feel my fingers. I couldn't feel my toes, but at least I could move my extremities. And I guess if I, in that moment, were to predict what would happen next, there's 100% no way it's possible. I had no idea what the work was. I didn't know who these beings were, but what was about to transpire over the next 3 years began to teach me who they were, and what my work was to be.
Are the six luminous beings the same beings that were with you when you first injured yourself at the lake and you stood up out of the water and you saw these orbs?
Funny enough, I've never thought about that or put that together, but now as you ask the question, surely they must be. I mean, that's the feeling I get right now. I think one of the things with NDEs, or with death, because we'll all either have a near-death experience or we'll have a death experience. When it comes, I know now for certain it comes at exactly the right time. And I think a lot of preparation is made here in the earthly plane, and I think a lot of preparation is made elsewhere. And when it finally lines up, we definitely have guides. We definitely have assistance. So yes, I think these orbs were starting to gather, or this energy was starting to gather, to prepare for this departure and then this return.
A lot of guests talk about that we have guides or angels with us at all times. So I was wondering if these orbs were those that are always with you, and then after the accident, you could suddenly now see them.
Yeah. I think they've always been with me. That's the feeling I get, but I was never aware of them. And I was relying a lot on just myself, especially in the military, what I could do physically. I trusted only the physicality of my body, the security of my Ranger platoon. Since breaking my neck and since having the experience, I can say with full confidence that I know that they're around now. So I assume they were around before. And I know that they're around now because one of the strange things that started to transpire afterwards was that as I speak with people or as I have a certain experience, I will actually see them again with my open-eyed vision in the air. So I will see like a diamond size pinprick of light, and it almost seems as though it's poking through a veil or something like a 3D veil, but I will often see it above somebody's head, just to the left, just to the right, when somebody says something that is true and something that's helpful for both of us, or if somebody suggests, oh, maybe we shouldn't take a ride on this public transportation today, and there's a sense of unease, and then the diamond light will flash and it'll say, yes, we should trust that judgment. So now I see them a lot. I would say not all of the time because it's still sparse and rare, maybe one time a week, but I actually see them with my open-eyed vision. So I feel them around a lot, and I especially feel them when it's
Do you think the fact that you shaved your neck is just a coincidence, or this whole experience was pre-planned, pre-birth?
I wonder if it was pre-planned pre-birth. I think that we in every moment we are where we are because we have our previous actions and choices that have led us to where we are. And I think that we have free will, but I do think that if we are heading in a certain direction and we need to be redirected in a big way, that those types of redirections are somewhat predestined, or the more that we stray in the wrong direction, the greater the need for a really serious impact and redirection. That it came about, I think, not as an agreement, before my birth, but maybe it was, if you don't remember what you're supposed to do, we're going to have to do something really serious to get you back on track. I do feel like um, that's what happened. And with the shaving of my neck, I mean, the other strange thing too is as I left my house and locked the door, I then picked up a kettlebell and did about 40 or 50 kettlebell swings. And this, I'm embarrassed to admit, but a little bit of vanity and ego in it. I knew I was going to a lake party. I knew that it was summer, there'd be a lot of women around, and I was newly single, and I was thinking, okay, well, I might as well look somewhat muscular. But because I did that, I had enough muscle padding in my neck and in my shoulders. Had I not done that as well, my neck would have been totally shattered. I would have never come out of the water. And so there are all of these moments that it would led up to this breaking of my neck that I now look back on and see, okay, I thought I was doing this for a certain reason. My mind attributed, you know, you have to look good for the party or you need to do this for this reason. But looking back, I now see, I think that in fact, I was receiving guidance like you better prepare your neck because you're going to have to go into surgery quick. You better protect your neck because it's going to get broken pretty hard.
Do you feel like out of these 6 orbs, there is a leader, and this being not only was speaking to you at the lake, but was also giving you directions on the other side?
Yes. Um, it's strange because I've hesitated. I mean, we'll speak about it maybe in a little bit, but I've been sewing now, embroidering. But I've been hesitant to sew or draw or sketch the beings I saw because I don't want to insult them. I know I can't do justice to the beauty that they were resonating. But whenever I think about them, there was one who was standing forward. And I know now, or I feel very strongly that he had come to me before in a dream, and that he was somewhat of the leader or the one that was actually speaking to me. Yes.
All right, so as I said in the beginning, you were bestowed a mission. What is that?
Well, I got home from the hospital and I could barely move. Um, I was laying prone for most of the time, and my family and my friends, who I love very much, were very gracious in feeding me and helping me walk to the bathroom if I needed to, but they gave me a little bell to ring if I needed to go use the restroom in the middle of the night. And as I slowly regained my strength, I had this overwhelming desire to sew a rose, to embroider a rose into fabric. And this is something totally foreign to me. The only sewing I had ever done in my whole life was sewing my Army Ranger tab into my patrol cap. And that I did very crudely. I used dental floss because we were on a training mission. So I had never embroidered before, but somehow I got a hold of some red thread, green thread, a needle, little piece of black cloth, and I set about embroidering a small rose. And as soon as I started doing that, I began to have, I guess, what we would commonly describe as downloads, or I started to receive information of what I had seen. I started to feel a great sense of ease and purpose. I knew as what I began to sew expanded, I started to sew a tree, butterflies, flowers, a dog. As I sewed more, I began to realize, at some point this is going to be seen by people. So early on, as part of my work or my mission, which I felt these beings of light were channeling through me, I was instructed, you must choose a mantra. Every stitch that you sew, you must be saying something mentally in your mind, at least to get started. Then you allow the mantra to go away, but you retain the energy. And so early on, as I was sewing, I started thinking, may this stitch bring peace to many people. And at the time, if you were to ask my friends and family, they'd probably think, well, Zach's totally lost his mind because here he is, former ranger. Now he's just sewing flowers, poor guy. But I felt really compelled, and I knew I had to keep sewing. And it was funny because it was really difficult for people who knew me well to accept that now I was embroidering flowers. But I had a very good spiritual buddy living in Costa Rica. He said, look, I've got a giant guest house. You can sew whatever you want in there. You can make it as big as you want. Come to Costa Rica. And so I did. I moved to Costa Rica. And as I regained my strength, I would sew more and more. I would walk to the local thread shop. I would buy all the threads they had. I would come back. I would sew from morning to night, into the night until my back gave out. And then I would lay on the tile floor. I would wake up the next morning and I would keep sewing. Some days I didn't eat. I would meditate, but my meditation became my sewing. And at a certain point, I realized, okay, look, I've lost my fiance, or my fiance broke up with me. I broke my neck. I'm kind of an invalid. There's nothing I can do anymore. I'm running out of savings. I guess it's time to become a monk. So I shaved my head, took a photo of myself, sent it to the monastery. They already knew me. And they said, okay, we can accept you as a monk, but you have to wait 6 months because of COVID and all of their new precautions. And so my buddy I was living with said, why don't you go move to the beach and just enjoy Costa Rica? You've been stuck here in this guest house, but go actually enjoy what Costa Rica is. So I said, okay. I took what I was sewing, which had now become a small tapestry, and I took a bus to the beach. I got the cheapest house I could find, a little shack by an intersection with a coconut tree outside. You couldn't drink the water. The latrine didn't work. I had hardly any money left. I was budgeting whether or not to buy another spool of thread or peanut butter and oatmeal and a banana and a pineapple. But every day I would go to the beach and I would sew under the trees in the sand. And I had no care for what is this going to become. At times I was conflicted. I thought I'm just weaving my own web of attachment. I should be a monk. I should release this thing I'm creating. And then one day, almost like a miracle, this man comes over as I'm sewing. And what I was sewing at the time was a Buddhist monk under a tree. And this man walks up wearing plain clothes. But he asked me what I was doing, and I told him, and he said, well, that's the strangest thing because I'm a former Buddhist monk and we are under a tree. He said, we should meditate. So we sat down, we meditated for a time. And after we finished our silence, we began sharing our stories. And he said, I used to be a Tibetan Buddhist monk. And one day I met a woman and fell in love. And I left the order. And I now know that only being a monastic, that's not the only way to enlightenment or to progression on the spiritual path. Another way is to have a partner and to really share your love with somebody else. And I felt this huge racing, tingling energy up and down my spine. And I thought, okay, literally, I'm sewing a monk under a tree. The monk under the tree has shown up. He's telling me I should look for love. I do wish that I could be with somebody. So the next day, so strange I'm sharing this, but I went on a dating app. But I thought, okay, what I'm doing is so strange. They have to be into what I'm doing, this sewing. So I didn't put a picture of myself. I just put a photo of the tapestry, and I said, I broke my neck, and beings of light are teaching me to sew. And now I'm married with my wife, who I met there on the beach. She was the only one that responded. Um, and again, I kind of thought that was where the mystery of what I was doing, or the energy of it, would kind of subside and slow down. But it was then through my wife that I made the biggest connection of this lifetime, and realized how I knew to embroider so well. And it was through my wife that I was introduced to a woman who essentially remembered me from previous life, and a 79-year-old woman in Jamaica.
So this woman became your embroidery teacher?
No, so I met my wife, and she was running retreats. She's incredibly good at starting uh, different healing retreats using different plant medicines, also meditation retreats. She hired me on as a meditation teacher, and then we ended up meeting the woman who, her most recent retreat business was essentially, we met the creator of her new retreat business, a woman whose name I can mention. She's a public figure. I think she was on Joe Rogan. Her name is Amanda Fielding. She's heralded as one of the pioneers in the psychedelic field. So through my wife, I was invited to meet Amanda in Jamaica at her summer home. So we fly to Jamaica, and I meet with Amanda, and we start talking. We immediately hit it off, and I immediately have this huge feeling of camaraderie, or like a feeling of being family or something, or recognizing her. And even though she was older, to me, she seemed like a young child almost. And even though I was younger, to her, I seemed old, like an old man. And we thought that was really funny. And soon we start talking about consciousness. She's very much into the mind and mystical experiences. I'm very much into meditation. And she said, oh, well, if you're into meditation, my godfather was a Buddhist monk. And I said, well, I love Buddhist monks. I study Buddhist monks. I'm a Buddhist scholar. Who was your godfather? And she said, well, I don't know if you know him, but he translated a very famous text. And immediately I said, it's not the Visuddhimagga, is it? It's not the path of purification written 1,500 years ago by Buddhaghosa in the great monastery in Sri Lanka, is it? And she looks at me and says, yes, that's him. And I said, Amanda, that is the wildest thing I've ever heard. Literally, the only book I brought with me to Costa Rica is that book. And I actually have it here just so we can see the title, but it's called The Visuddhimagga. Visuddhi is purification, Magga is path. And for some reason, I had become obsessed with this text. And so she begins to tell me the story of the man before he was a monk, that before he became a monk, was in the military. Well, I was in the military. And when he was in the military, he was introduced to a Buddhist book. Well, when I was in the military in Iraq, I was introduced to a Buddhist book. And then she said the most mind-blowing thing of the day, which was, before he was a soldier, he was embroidering flowers into my chairs in my dining room in England before I was even born. And I said, Amanda, I have to see these chairs. Soon I'm in London. I'm in her house, a beautiful old castle, 500 years old. There are 3 moats around it. It's a long history of her family living there. And I go into this ancient dining room with these beautiful embroidered dining room chairs. It's a very storied dining room. Aldous Huxley used to sit in there talking about his book ideas with Amanda's grandmother. And when I saw the flowers in the chairs, I was utterly, I don't know, the feeling even now is like, what the, I won't say it, but like, what the heck? What is life? Because I kid you not, and I have it here. The flower I had been sewing, which is right here, above a meditating rainbow man, was the exact same flower that he had sewn into Amanda's chairs in 1939 at the start of World War II. And so I spent the next 3 days in her home, sewing by the fireplace, and her wonderfully kind housekeepers would come in and stoke the fire. And at one point, Amanda came in and she said, "You know, that's exactly where Osbert or Bhikkhu Ñānamoli used to sew the flowers." And when she said that, I feel an opening of 10,000 years, or like an expansion of time and a recalibration of, okay, what am I really doing? Why am I sewing? And I had this feeling of, before he ever became a soldier or a monk, this man, this young guy, knew that he was on the cusp. The world was on the cusp of a world war. What does that even mean? There had only been one before. And before he was called off to duty, he had the thought, as silly as it might be, well, maybe if I sit down and do something peaceful, and enough people sit down and do something peaceful, it'll change the energy of the planet and there won't be a big war. So he spent hours and hours and hours embroidering flowers into all of these old dining room chairs. And there were moments in his life that I can remember. I can remember being on the steps, sewing the flowers underneath a tree. And I can remember specifically, as he was working on these chairs, what hung behind the chairs was a grand tapestry. And he was infatuated and in awe of the tapestry, because it was a tapestry of an angel speaking to a man who was kneeling down, speaking with angels. And before he could ever begin a tapestry, he was summoned into the military. And then when he returned, because of his disillusionment with military, with war, he then went off to become a Buddhist monk, translated this text, and died quite young. But I do think that in that life, he had this desire to return to just do some sewing, or do the thing that he really wanted to do, just use the creative energy, but in a peaceful way. And so now, more and more, as I continue to sew, I continue to remember moments of this man's life who I feel was me, but also I understand is not me, because even, the Jeff I was at the beginning of this interview is not me. Or sorry, the Jeff you are and the Nuestro I am, we're constantly changing. And who I was a month ago is different. Who I was a year ago is different. So a lifetime ago is a very different energy. But more and more, I can understand and feel how this flow of energy moves.
So you have the tapestry behind you. Can you share with us some of the elements of what's going on in it?
Okay, where to start? Well, there's a giant tree in the middle here. The canopy goes way up past the ceilings, right? And then here we have an old limb, which is almost calcified, almost turned to stone. And then this new shoot of the tree going up. And I get the sense that the times that we live in right now, there's a great shifting happening. And our calcified ways of living, our systems, the things that we think we know, they become such solid structures. They're immovable, but they're not unbeneficial. And the wisdom of mushrooms still pulls from the past, and water still flows down the old tree trunk. But from the new tree, which I believe there's a new awakening happening on the planet, there's a new blossoming that's occurring that's totally separate from the old world, and yet it's still linked together. And I think one of the many ways that we can move closer to this new awakening, or this new rebirthing of the planet, is to enter within, to find silence. Even though it's so hard and it's easier to look at our phones and it's easier to be distracted, I think that we are more and more being compelled to, enter the inner chamber or enter the cave within. So I also have a little cave here with a stairway going to the cave, water of wisdom falling down, new flowers blossoming, an angel rising up. So that's what comes to mind first, but I could go on.
Does the ideas of this tapestry come to you like a download or flow into you? Or do you have to sit there and think, well, what am I going to do next?
That's a good question. I never know what I'm going to do. Sometimes I'll have a dream of a red thread or a blue thread racing off in a certain direction. And all I know is, okay, when I awaken, I need to sew a red thread in that part of the tapestry. And I never know where it should go. I just thread the needle and I get close to it and I wait for, I guess you could say, inspiration to come into me. But it's so fast now and it's so natural, um, that I no longer need the dreams to tell me what to do. I just trust the flow of it. So I just reach my hand into my drawer of threads. I just pull out whatever color I feel on my fingertips. I look at the color and I know where to put it, but I never understand what the bigger picture is. Sometimes as I'm sewing, I have felt, this is an alien spaceship, or this galaxy is far away in this direction, and something is showing me this is how beings get from one galaxy to the other. Sometimes I'll sew a flower or a star, and I'll recognize, this is the energy of a person who's passed away, who's now nearby. And by sewing and keeping my mind fixed on that person or that spirit, they will help me with this next part. But I have no plans for it. I have no ultimate vision. The only thing I know is I'm supposed to keep sewing, keep making it larger, and I'm supposed to keep sewing the same tapestry my entire life. The ultimate goal, I guess, maybe too, is just to expand it out to such a length and such a height that when somebody stands in front of it, their entire peripheral vision is obscured, and for 1 minute, their consciousness or their mind is fully filled with a unique vision that they've never seen before, and that all of the prayers that I've put into it and all of the inspiration I've received from different angels or devas or whatever energies it is that's working through me, that somebody can receive that in a minute, in a moment, in a second.
Just from what I see now, I'd like to ask you some questions about it. For example, what is the significance of the angel and the eye on the other side?
Yes. So the angel, I began the day that I arrived in Costa Rica, and I didn't know it was going to be an angel. I just wanted to put into the tapestry the energy of an old monk who died, I think, over 100 years ago, named Zhu Yun. He was a famous Chinese Zen monk, lived to be 120 years old. And I obtained a copy of his autobiography from a monastery. It's very rare. You can't buy it online, but there's a photo of him. So I just sewed his little white beard, his goatee, and then I let the goatee just sit there for a couple of months until I felt the energy of, okay, now I'm ready to complete his form. And as I began to sew more and more, it took on the form of almost a feminine energy of a woman, and then the wings started to come up, but I didn't know they were wings. And then he seems to be kind of levitating over the leaves and over the flowers, and he's been one of the guiding energies of my whole sewing experience. And I do believe now that he was one of the beings I met at the doorway. I get that feeling very strongly.
What about the eye?
I think right now the frequency of the planet is rising. And I think what that means is not only are we offered an opportunity to transcend our own limitations, but I think that the trees and the flowers and the plants are waking up as well. I have titanium in my neck, which is the same metal as the cell phone antenna we have in our cell phone. It's the same antenna in our laptops. It's the same metal in all of the cell phone towers. So I feel in my neck the energies that we're spraying out all over our neighborhoods, all over our cities. But I think trees also surely feel it, and flowers also surely feel it. They have such delicate leaves. Flowers have such delicate petals, but they respond to the light, and they're absorbing radiation, or they're absorbing different waves. And I think that the trees themselves are absorbing all of our digital screaming, and they're speaking now. And so whenever I'm working on the tree, I always put eyes into the roots because I feel like they're not left behind in this shifting. They're very much rising along with the vibration of the earth, and there is a witnessing that the trees are doing with their own eyes, their own leaves.
If you can do it, I would really like to see what you embroidered about the UFO traveling from one galaxy or wherever to here.
Yeah, it'll take a moment to adjust. But
Sure.
if you should we take a pause and I'll
Of,
adjust it?
of course. What I'd like for you to do, if you don't mind, is keep it there for just a moment and move the camera back so we can all get a sense, with you standing next to it, the size of it.
Okay. Let's see. Let's see how far I can move this back. It'll still be too big, but at least we get a little bit more of a sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I can if you want, I can reorient it to the space area because I do feel like I connect quite strongly with the UFO energy.
Please do.
I felt inspired to begin sewing a galaxy. I actually don't remember what it was originally, but as I began to sew, I realized, I'm sewing a galaxy. So there's one up here in the corner. It took about a year to kind of work on that. But as I was working on it, I started to get a sense that there was a, a pre-created avenue or like a highway or something, or a I don't even know the words, like a hyperdimensional jump box or
Mm.
something. But I started to have all of these visions of different geometric shapes that are kind of hovering in space. And by entering through one, sort of in the outer arms of a galaxy, they propel whatever enters them to the next box or the next waypoint. And then through that one and through that one and through that one. And it happens so rapidly that it's the blink of an eye, and it's the speed of the energy I would get is the speed of a hummingbird, and that there are beings or ships that can move from galaxy to galaxy, pollinating good ideas like that very fast. And so this movement of thread here, in this box here, and these geometric patterns and shapes all lead to this ship or this entity, which as I was sewing it, sometimes it felt like it wanted to be a ship, like a saucer. Sometimes it felt like it wanted to be the shell of a walnut. And sometimes when I flipped it on its side, it felt like it was an angel, or it wasn't a ship, it was a being. And the more I worked on it, the more it just felt like energy. And so this is pretty much it completed here. And the strange thing was, I then started to work on a second galaxy, which is right here. But everybody who sees it says, "Oh, that's a UFO." So sometimes I think I'm doing one thing, but the visual message, the download I'm receiving, I translate it one way in my mind with my words, but the image that comes out is actually translated by the viewer much differently. And now I've accepted, okay, maybe this here is a UFO, something that looks similar to what a lot of people, myself included, are seeing in the skies now, and I think have been seeing for all of history.
A significant number of my near-death experience guests start seeing UFOs after their NDE. Is that the same with you?
You know it's the same. Yeah, I mean it's really wild, and my Buddhist background uh, comes up into my mind, and I think, oh, I shouldn't be talking about these kinds of things. But the truth is, when I was in Costa Rica, I saw three flying saucers, three ships, beautiful ships, right at sunset. And the only reason I saw them was because I opened my eyes, but I was in meditation out on the rocks on the beach. There were some thousand people or so up and down the beach, and people were taking pictures. I didn't have a camera. But when I opened my eyes from meditation and I looked out, I focused on the horizon to keep my gaze still. But as soon as I did that, I noticed that there were three other objects in the sky that were also not moving. And as the clouds were changing form, as the sun was becoming dimmer and dimmer, the ships remained unmoving. And I thought, oh my God, we're seeing UFOs and I don't have a phone. Well, maybe I should try to communicate with them. So I fixed my attention onto one of them and I asked a question. But as soon as I even began the question, the answer came. And my question was, why can I see you? Why are you allowing us to see you? And the answer was twofold. One, we enjoy the sunset as well. And the other part of the answer was, we can camouflage ourselves, but if we can't see out, or if you can't see us, it limits our ability to see out. And so we are unmasking ourselves. But then the final information that came through was most people won't notice anyway. That there is a certain level of openness or perception required to see these beings. And not all of humanity is at that point. Although I think you and I both know the majority of people watching your show are definitely at that point. I've listened to some great experiences, but yeah, that was the first time I saw them. And then there was the other one that I have video of.
And what happened during that experience?
I was in England, and it was about 3 years into my endeavor in sewing this giant tapestry. And I was getting really strong feelings and also questions, feelings of, am I really communicating with aliens or am I communicating with something in the sky? Because sometimes I'm sewing space and I very much feel like somebody's trying to teach me about space or open my mind to something that very much feels like aliens or UFOs. And I learned that there was a hill in the English countryside called Clay Hill. It's not natural. Nobody knows how it was formed, and it's incredibly old, and there are no trees on top. And I thought, okay, maybe I should go out to Clay Hill, meditate on the top of the hill, and lay the tapestry out and let them see it so they can know, hey, I'm doing the work. You know, what's next? I went there with my wife. My son was on my back in the baby carrier. Before we even got to the top of the hill, my wife had a feeling to look up, and when she did, there was a massive ring of bright light in the sky above the hill. Not only that, there was a rainbow doorway, or like a rainbow geometric figure, not too different from what I'm trying to sew here, in the sky that this giant ring of light was shooting out of. And my wife's father, thankfully, took out his camera and started filming, and it's incredible. And we didn't really know what to think, and I was a little bit in shock. I wasn't prepared. I thought I'd have to meditate and communicate, but it was as though they were already there. And it was a really sweet feeling. We just stood there in awe for a minute while we talked about, wow, there's looks like a rainbow doorway or a rainbow shape, and wow, there's this giant ring of light. What does this all mean? I went to the top of the hill and the light vanished. And I thought, okay, now it's time to meditate. I meditated for a little while. And the very next day, a crop circle, one of the most massive crop circles to ever appear in England, appeared in the field below. It was the exact same shape, a giant ring with a smaller circle in the middle. But to say smaller, the inner circle, it was like a Zen dot or a perfect sphere, but flattened. And it was massive. I mean, you could fit like 300 people in the small circle. And then the outer ring was nearly a mile in circumference. And I know because I ran around the entire thing. But we received word there's a crop circle exactly where that ring of light was. So I went back with the intention to go into the crop circle and meditate in the center. So my wife came along with me, so did one of her friends. They stayed at the top of a high hill. And then I made my way down into the field, climbed under the barbed wire, and started approaching this massive, massive formation. When I got to the edge of the crop circle, I had the strong feeling to remove all metal from my body. Of course, I couldn't remove the titanium in my neck, but I could remove my belt and I could remove my phone. So I set them outside. I also understood I should take my shoes off so I could connect more with the earth. So I took my shoes off. And then I started walking into the crop circle as one would enter a grand meditation hall or a grand monastery. I felt a real reverence. I also started to get a headache in the lower right quadrant of my skull. And I was kind of blown away by how huge it was, because I reached the outer ring, which was maybe a couple of yards wide and extended all the way around. And then I got through the wheat to the center of it, and the center circle was still very big. And then I moved in even more, all the way to the very center. And there, the wheat was swept in a beautiful circle, as though somebody had taken a giant cosmic finger and like dug it into the wheat and twisted. And then in the middle of that circle, there were red flower petals. And the feeling I had when I saw them was really sweet. The first thought I had was, oh, some other local, woman who likes crop circles must have come here and she made a little offering. The second thought I had was, oh, these flower petals are from a different side of the planet, and they were brought here in an instant to show us how quickly these beings can move. And then the third thought was, I started sewing with red thread, this same color. I started sewing a flower. Maybe this is confirmation, or maybe they're trying to say, we see you already or something. But I let that all go because I didn't have much time. My wife's up there with our son. So I sat down and I started meditating. And my first thought was, okay, how the heck do I communicate with aliens? And then immediately the answer was, you don't. You just meditate the exact same way. You observe your breathing, you find peace within yourself, and you just reside within that peace. There's no telephone call to make. So I just sat there for about 7 minutes meditating. And in that moment, I slipped into a very deep samadhi, or a very deep jhanic absorption, very, very deep space of peace that I don't quite remember, but it was about 7 minutes. And then I felt, okay, now I'm supposed to stand up and lay down with my head in the very center of the circle looking up. So I did that, and I felt the headache in my head shift, and it felt as though something was being recalibrated. Then I felt, now I'm supposed to explore the entire inner circle. So I did that, taking mental note of what it was like. And then I'm supposed to go to the outer circle and run around. And, keep in mind, I broke my neck 3 years ago. So running around at full speed is not exactly in my repertoire yet. But as soon as I reached the outer sphere, outer ring, I felt this incredible surge of energy, and I sprinted all the way around. And it took a long time. It took 8-10 minutes. And the strange thing was, it's a perfect circle. So I had no idea where I had started and no idea where the end was. I found myself in this weird liminal space of just running as though I was running around a track, but on a track in high school, there's a straightaway. In a circle, sorry, I did some water. In a circle, there's no, how do you know where you are? So I just kept running and running, and I thought, gosh, I'm getting tired, but I feel I'm supposed to run around this whole thing. And finally, I just stopped out of exhaustion, and then that's where my shoes were. And it was a really weird experience. And I wished in that moment I knew what does this mean? What is this? Because I can't make a ring of light in the sky. I definitely don't know how to make a crop circle. I'm not making this up. I have nobody to tell this about, but it's a true experience. I thought for a while I should share this somewhere, but where would you go with this kind of story other than Jeff's paranormal podcast? But since then, the downloads from what that is, what that shape, what that specific crop circle represents, and what maybe all of them represent, has been coming through. And I'm excited about what it means and what may come about next.
Can you share with us your procedure of how you meditate?
Okay, how I was taught to meditate. First, to sit upright with a straight spine, which I can do now. Resting the hands comfortably in the lap, giving yourself good support. And then closing the eyes and bringing all of the attention to the awareness of the breath, the feeling of the breath as it comes into the nostrils, and the feeling of the breath as it goes out of the nostrils. And I fix my attention not only on the feeling of the breath passing through, but I also notice when it turns as it exits, and then when it comes in and stops and turns again. And by focusing more and more on the breath, it allows one to focus more and more on the present moment. And the beautiful thing about our breath is it's unique to us, it's always there. We never have to wait for it or take a class. And the other wonderful thing is every breath is utterly unique. So you can imagine sitting on the beach watching the waves. The waves have a cadence to them, but if you were to look closely at the surface of each wave, they're totally unique. There are different inflections of the water, different ways that the light is reflecting off of the water. So with our breath, as you begin to focus more and more on the breath, you begin to focus more and more on the present moment. And when that happens, there is a wellspring of wisdom that is inexhaustible that begins to come up. And also, I mean, this is essentially the teaching of the Buddha. This is how he attained enlightenment, but also it's the wisdom of Jesus as well. He often speaks of the Holy Spirit, and you can imagine when he was in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights praying, he was with the Holy Spirit. He was with the inspiration, the breath coming in, the expiration, the breath going out, and all practices, all religions, all mantras, all of them agree with this practice or kind of bring us to a state of stillness, and they're all useful. Yoga, all of these things. Ultimately, once we've done the mantra, once we've done the yoga, and we sit silently, we just allow everything to be as it is. And also by observing the breath fully, the mind has no room to have any worry about what's coming in the future, and it has no room to have any idea or thought about the past. So that's been my practice since I began meditating. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Behind you on the tapestry is like a tree and with these pentagon shapes on it. What are those shapes?
Here, yeah.
Yeah, some are in blue and some are in gold. What are those shapes representing?
I don't really know, but the feeling I get is that this tree itself is one of the new. It represents the energy of what is now being birthed on the planet, and I feel that the yellow light is somewhat representative of us or humanity currently, and the blue light is a transition or a merging or a coming together of the higher energies or the higher powers. Because often, I mean, in my own NDE and other NDEs, there's often a blue light associated with the experience. So I feel like it's the rising of the vibration and then the merging of these two worlds in a new birthing of, I don't know, maybe eventually it will become like a temple, or maybe it's the crown of the tree. I really don't know, but I'm beginning to maybe form them sort of like stained glass windows. And I imagine when I'm finished, in each of those shapes, there will be a figure, maybe an angel, maybe a being, maybe a message, maybe a code.
And anywhere in your tapestry, did you embroider the 6 orbs?
I haven't yet, no. No, I did embroider an orb for myself, kind of at the top of the tapestry, but to say it's for myself is not quite the right way to phrase it. In one of my meditations, I had a full remembrance of dying in a previous life. And when I died, just like all of these other NDEs, I didn't experience the final pain of death. I left the body as an orb, and I was able to see the orb floating peacefully above a lagoon in Sri Lanka, below where the birds were swooping, but just above where the canoes were going underneath. So I began to sew an orb to represent that energy of, okay, what are we when we leave the body? And the interesting thing was, rather than sew an orb, I was instructed first to sew a cross. Um, and then I started thinking of the energy of Jesus as well, and of all of the saints, um, and started to make the connections of there. Often we see in religious imagery there's like an aura around the beings, but we see it two-dimensionally because it's a two-dimensional painting. But really, there's a sphere, and so I've begun to sew one orb. Yes.
Within your tapestry, do you have a favorite part? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, I do. I'd have to move it. Should I move it first, or should I just tell you?
Either one.
Yeah,
Why don't you,
I'll just explain it, and if
okay.
people are interested, they can look on Instagram or something, or please come see it in person. Um, my favorite section of the tapestry right now is at the base of the tree, nestled within the roots. I'm sewing a waterfall that's coming down over the roots, and the roots are protecting it from all sides. And there's a peaceful woman who's kneeling, maybe praying, and there are flowers that look kind of like Tibetan singing bowls or little buttercups or orange and yellow vessels. And I feel that it is a protective and a safe space. And I'm reminded again and again as I meditate and as we meditate or as we cultivate good energy, gratitude, love, as we keep our vibration high, we are creating that structure of strong roots for ourselves. We are creating that wellspring of water, that water falling, the wisdom, and we're also helping to allow the tree to grow. And of course, when a tree grows, at first we have to take care of it, but as it gets larger, it begins to take care of us. It begins to provide shade. Begins to provide protection, fruits. So yeah, my favorite part of the tapestry is right in the middle, right at the bottom.
Well, I'm glad that you offered for us to come see it because I hope our paths cross someday so I can see it in person. Once you transition out of this life, or at least before you do so, do you think you're going to put this somewhere like in a museum or something?
A lot of people have asked if I will put it in a museum. Originally, I thought, I mean, yeah, I guess that's where something like this goes. But I found I continue to be invited to retreats to hang it for different types of meditation retreats, or it's also hung in about a dozen medicine ceremonies with different plant medicines. And then I've also hung it at music festivals, just in the trees between two giant oak trees. And then when I'm alone, I just go find the oldest, largest tree I can, and I just hang it in a tree and work on it. Um, the vision I keep having is that I'm supposed to just continue to travel around, and wherever I'm invited, if there's a large enough space and people are there to help me, because it's a lot of work to hang it. I need bamboo or tethers or straps. That I'm supposed to continue traveling around sewing quietly and offering people a space to sit in silence to look at it, but then ultimately to be inspired just to close their eyes and just sit and be peaceful. So my wish, and I'm grateful to be on your show as well, because I feel like this is my opportunity to ask. But I feel that creating space, creating peace and space is a co-creation, and I know how to sew, but I need to rely on other people to help me set up events and that kind of thing. But I'm more than happy to hang it anywhere. Anybody that wants to come see it, if the space is available, I'll show up.
Well, you mentioned that you can see it on Instagram. Is there anywhere else that people can see it, like a website or something?
Yeah, a good friend of mine just made a website for me, so it's my artist name, Nuestro Ñānamoli, .com. So you can go there, and then as more events uh, come about, I'll be posting events there as well. And if you want to order prints to have it condensed down into something you can hang on your wall, we're selling prints also. And then if people want to work with me one on one, one of the things that started to come about after I broke my neck was the ability to do past life readings, which I've only done for friends and family, but I feel like it's time to open it up a little bit. But yeah, my website and then Instagram for now are the two places to see some good photos of it, some video.
If people want to ask you questions, is there somewhere on your website they can do so, or just leave you a comment on your Instagram page?
If you message me on the website, I'll try to respond. And then truthfully, right now, Instagram works pretty well. So if you message me on there, I'll try to respond to anybody who messages me.
All right. Well, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Yes, a positive message. It's funny. I've watched many of your videos now to kind of, learn the flow of your shows. And I know you ask this question at the end of every uh, chat, and I thought of preparing something, but I haven't. Um, so if you'll allow me for a second, I'm just going to close my eyes and kind of ask for the same guidance that helps me to sew, to help me to say something peaceful.
That would be great.
So, there is absolutely nothing to be afraid of because you are a being of light.
Nuestro, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Jeff, so much for having me on your podcast. And also, I'm truly grateful that you're offering so many people this platform to share these stories, because I think it's what we really need to be taking in our feed. We wake up in the morning and we have our social media feed, kind of like cows have their feed in the trough. But if we don't choose it wisely, we can harm ourselves. We can put poison into our minds. But I truly think that you and your spirit and your offering of creating this kind of a space is really helping to flip the energy. And so yeah, thank you so much for having me on. And I think you're a great guy.
Well, it was an absolute pleasure hanging out with you today. And again, I really appreciate you being with us and sharing your amazing life. And I wish you massive success in whatever you do.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.